This is the Ecommerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Hello and welcome to the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast. I'm Julie Spear, Head of Retail Marketplace Services at Acadia, alongside my co-host, Jordan Ripley, the Director of Retail Operations. And today we're joined by an old friend of the podcast, Mike Blac, Chief Growth Officer at Profitero. We'll be talking through a recent report from Profitero that dives into the details of something they're calling digitally influenced shopper. So with that, Mike, great to have you back. Welcome.
It's awesome to be back. I always love being on the show. As you guys know, it's one of my favorites.
Ah, shucks.
Not scripted, but we'll take it.
Well, we are excited to dig into the report. And this is an update of a digitally influenced shopper report that you released in 2023. Before we get into the updates to it, can you talk about what the goal of the report is and how it came to be, what you set out to do, and all the questions that you kind of look to answer in the process?
Yes. Very simply, the goal of this report is to correct misguided assumptions about the impact digital is having on the entire business, not just what transacts online. And that's often, I think, what executives see more is this sort of channel-based view of digital and impact on sales. And the reason we did this is because we really want to give e-com leaders and retail media leaders some ammunition, really to light a fire under the butts of their executives who in many ways are still hemming and hawing about the need to invest in this space, believe it or not. But more importantly, and this will be a theme, I think, of our conversation, the hemming and hawing about the need to change internal ways of working cross-functionally in their business. When we see this growth in digital, the real tension points come internally with how teams operate, the speed at which they operate, how they collaborate. And that takes a lot of change, takes a lot of executive leadership effort. And I would say in the majority, most brands are still at the early stages of doing that. So we looked at this as an opportunity to give that ammunition. And a lot of it was inspired by research Forrester had done before COVID. And this idea of digitally influenced sales or digitally influenced shoppers is really something that they originated. And what we found coming out of COVID, and this is the second time we've done this report, that research hadn't been updated. So there was really no view of what was happening even after COVID when this really took off and people embedded digital in their shopping behavior. So we wanted to come to the industry with some recent data. And I think if you look at the data, it does make it clear that if we just look at digital penetration as executive leaders, brand marketers, we see digital impacts maybe at most 20% of our sales. That's in the classic definition of digital penetration. But if we look at the statistics in this report, what we're calling digitally influenced shoppers, now we're seeing that it impacts 2/3 of our success. So we really wanted to frame the conversation more about the consumer and less about these channel-based definitions of success.
That's great. And this idea of digitally influenced, I like it in that it intuitively makes sense. Like I feel like all of us have been in the store aisle and felt like the digital influence as we shop or go about our transactions. But for the purposes of this research and the actual methodology behind it, when you say digitally influenced, like what classifies somebody into that category? Is it like, I am a digitally influenced shopper, I'm not a digitally influenced? Are there degrees to that? Like it seems like a sort of messy concept to nail down from a research methodology standpoint. So I'm just curious how you went about that.
Yeah, we really asked, we use the term digital in, I think, a broad sense. So we use really this idea of digital touch points or some kind of digital experience, which for us can consist of one is the digital shelf. So that does come through pointedly. We do ask some very pointed questions around content influence, reviews influence, like what we classically think of as what's on a retailer's site that we can see, but also social media. In many ways, social media is and is becoming more and more a second digital shelf. Number one, it's a place where we learn more about products, not just in discovery, but in consideration. Influencers obviously having a big impact on our ultimate purchase decisions. but also more and more social media sites are becoming shelves, transactable sites as well. What we really want, we use that kind of definition. We let consumers sort of self-select into acknowledging, digital has this influence. But I would kind of think of it as digital shelf on retailer site as well as social media as something that's happening above, across, that's also influencing the purchase experience. And really, it's not binary. The purchase path is not binary. It's not, digital can come in at all parts of the journey. And I think what we see, the brands that are doing this well really embrace this idea of like a surround sound stereo experience. They know that at any moment consumers can engage with their brands digitally and all facets. And the brands that are winning are really the ones making that like full investment. And they're doing it in a very synchronized and coordinated way versus just a siloed way where, all right, well, we can optimize our content, but if we're not doing the right things on social, does that really matter? Or we can run a ton of digital campaigns, is one of my favorite examples. Like, oh, well, let's have a big national digital campaign and let's have all these influencers, but I land on the retailer page and the content's bad. That's the challenge that companies have to think of. It's not like doing one thing really good, but doing many things good and doing it in a very holistic way because the consumer is looking at it in a holistic way.
For the purposes of this research, you survey a ton of people and you ask them about their behaviors. Like when you went to this purchase, did you check reviews online or something like that? And then if that cluster of behaviors then collectively makes up whether that person was digitally influenced or not. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. It's you opt in and you opt out. You say basically, yeah, I'm a person who just purely makes purchases in store. You're categorized, in a different way. So it is binary in that sense that we do have shoppers that are saying like, and if you can look at it, it's probably less than a third now that like, yeah, I'm strictly just a store physical person.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
They're still out there.
We might touch on that with this question. Dig into there were two demographic trends that are noted in the report. First, the U.S. consistently leads in digital adoption kind of across all omnichannel behaviors, whether it's using the online info to support purchases, like checking those reviews online and I'll buy in store, or switching channels because it's out on Amazon, find it on Walmart, what have you. But the second one is that there's a real difference when you look at this on the generational spectrum, a real acceleration in the digital influence as you move through the generations. So in many markets, fewer than half of the boomers interviewed are digitally influenced, while over 75% of Gen Z shoppers are. What do you think that means for us as we're approaching our marketing strategy, taking into consideration
and I would say it's really very closely, when we say Gen Z, it's very close, similar statistics with millennials. It's not like we're ignoring millennials out there.
Or Gen X. I would like to understand more, just for a friend.
I am Gen X, the forgotten generation, right?
Or the greatest.
I feel like we should have gotten my dad on here for a voice for the boomers. Before we bag on them too much.
Me, myself, yes.
Yeah.
So we thought it was important. This was different than what we did last time, is we thought consumers are not homogenous and we have different strategies as marketers with different audiences. I think it was important to capture the generational divide because we have to kind of think in the here and now, but we also have to think about 5 years from now when really the game is all about how do brands grow? It's really around household penetration. It's new buyers. There's always a set of new buyers out there that don't have brand loyalty. And I think brand loyalty is going by the wayside, right? The brands that my parents bought are not the brands I bought, are not the brands my children buy. And if you think about a generation whose decisions are largely going to be made on digital, it's wide open. It's fair game. It's fair game. Those loyalties that were set in grocery store experience, if they're not there. So I think it's really important for organizations to think about their transformation in that like 5-year, 10-year window of growing household penetration and make sure that they're making investments here now to win with those shoppers as it's material to their categories, but also think about the future because change is hard and change takes time. If I'm a brand thinking about who's going to be buying my brand in the future, knowing that digital is more important, I have to wake up and say, wow, we are way behind. We need to make more investment. We need to change our data. We need to change our culture. we need to hire different types of people. I also think of the connection between the internal talent you have working on this business. They're going to start looking a lot like your future consumer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to see the trends from that demographic to know both, hey, we have a little time, but also that fire and say, man, these are going to be the people that are going to define our household penetration in the future. And we got to get going on it. And that's why I think it's really important to have that generational view to see all those layers in where you need to start thinking about planning for that shift.
I feel like you see this a lot, like in understanding already who is your demographic of your brand and then knowing the relative priority. Like if you think about all the sort of buzzy digital first D2C brands and then trying to struggle with what does a brick and mortar strategy even look like for us? And we'll have a little pop-up shop where you can try things on and get a drink or something. And it's very different than a Kohl's, right? And I think this is one of those where it's exactly what you said, like make the investments, hire the right people so that you can, whatever that manifestation of your kind of omni-channel experience reflects how people actually want to shop in that generation.
Yeah. And it also tells you a little bit too about who do you want to benchmark against?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the benchmarking traditionally, like a CPG brand, you might look at your biggest competitors. But I think a lot of times what I'm seeing brands saying is, hey, you know what? When you guys benchmark us, can you benchmark us, even if it's a grocery food brand, can you benchmark us against L'Oreal? What does L'Oreal understand, right? L'Oreal's demographic, what they've done really well is engage a lot more of the younger demographics. They have a different standard for how they want to treat their content. I think it also helps you think about who are the brands today who are doing this really well and engaging that next generation, and how do we actually start benchmarking against them? Because we want to really anchor on those who get that future and not benchmark us against the brands that are still kind of living in the space we're still living in today.
Yeah. And this actually brings up something you hinted at the start, which is a big part of this research is just changing the mentality internally of these orgs. There's a ton of stats in here that I'll reel off a few, but a lot of them seem really compelling, at least from where we're sitting. Like 57% of shoppers discover new brands online. So that goes to your idea of like creating penetration and ideally loyalty. 45% of shoppers order a product online if it's out of stock in store. 54% of shoppers more likely to be influenced by online than in store. So, all those trade dollars that are going elsewhere kind of maybe make sense. 46% of shoppers check out online content while they're in store, and that moves to 53% that check out content even before they get to the store. There's just a ton of influence here for that digitally influenced shopper. And I'm wondering, I realize this report has only been out a couple months, or maybe just in the early stage of getting the ripple effects around it. But in your conversations with those in the industry and brand side folks, like, do you get a sense of, did any of these stand out where someone's like, oh, okay, I missed this, like we need to make changes?
Yeah, I would say like there's two components, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my favorite study you didn't mention that I think is important. But when I look at new brands discovery and I look at content, what that says to me is there are already processes well underway in a lot of organizations to launch new innovation. And what you typically find is there's a whole set of checklists to launch a new product innovation to store. But that is often not looked at as a holistic experience. That tells me is, hey, let's go back to our old playbook for launching innovation. Yes, it's about distribution. It's about great shopper marketing. But it's also about making sure that on that checklist, we know that every new item has sufficiency of reviews. We know that that item is searchable and findable. We know that that item has great content. So in that way, it's basically, hey, you have a playbook, but we're just going to add a few more things to that. And we're going to make sure that when we talk about innovation launch, knowing that new brands, new products are found online, we got to make sure that that checklist is now taking it into effect, these other influence factors, right? So this is a slight change of what they're doing today. And it's very similar with content. If you think about all of the planning and activation and effort that goes into getting new shopper displays, getting content to shelf, oftentimes we still find that brands don't have their brand teams that are creating that content, don't have a checklist for making sure all the digital assets are ready. My argument is, well, these things are also important. In that case, that then becomes, again, I think, look inward and assess your processes and say, on these two processes that exist today for the physical world, what do we need to do to enhance those processes? And I think that's the biggest aha And many brands are starting to do that. They're building that work back plan for an innovation or a new piece of content or shopper marketing execution with that in mind and making sure they have all the milestones to get those assets ready and get that out to shelf. So that's kind of one thing that stands out to me. We're not surprised to see that. I think it's more like urgency to make sure that we're making those changes on that front. It's kind of what stands out to me on that side. But the other statistic that I love in the report is we asked shoppers, like, how do you discover a product? And the number one, no surprise, 37% of shoppers said it's a search bar, but 21% said it was the favorites buy again. 21% said it was the category browse node. 29% it was the promotion deal. So what does that tell me? Oh, and by the way, 10% said it's AI chat. What that tells me is that discovery, as much as we are very search-centric in the way we think about the digital shelf, discovery is way more fragmented than that. Search is becoming very crowded. Everybody's trying to win search. We should just be as equally aware that there's a lot more real estate for us to capitalize on. And if we actually want to do things that are differentiated and stand out, we should be having conversations about how do we make sure we're showing up in the browse taxonomy better? How do we make sure we're collaborating retailers on the right UX site experience to prompt discovery at different places and not just go after the place where everybody's going and it's becoming high cost diminishing returns is one of the big ahas that kind of jumped out to me there too.
And one of the things that kind of plays off of that too, it's bringing me back to the last time we had you on the show and we talked about the digital shelf. It's more diffuse. Like there's so many ways, like you're pointing out, that shoppers can discover products, but it's also super concentrated because shoppers just focus on the top results. But one of the things in the report you noted is that 1 in 2 shoppers now add products to their cart straight from their search results without visiting the PDP, which I find that really surprising.
I'm for not less meticulous people.
Yeah, I'm not a high consideration shopper, but I am not one of the 2 that does that. Given all of how digital is influencing in-store decisions and the conversation we've had previously about the digital shelf, how should we think about that behavior kind of in the broader context of digitally influenced?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, that is going to change a lot by your category, right? There are some categories that are very high investment, education based, and there are some that become a little bit more like on autopilot, especially if you're very brand loyal. For example, like in the faucets category or plumbing category, you're remodeling a kitchen and there's a lot more research you have to do, potentially understand if you're making the right decision than say if you're buying potato chips. Let's just caveat that will likely change. So you really just got to understand, is that true for your category? Not true. But that being said, if we think about that 1 out of 2 shoppers doing that, what it tells me is it's really the importance of strong fundamentals get magnified. What I mean by that is think there's a first order of principles for winning on the digital shelf. And it really gets filtered by search, right? So if you think about that search experience, what's the information that you get as a shopper? Well, the first thing is the product even available? Is it listed? Is it in stock? What's the price? I could see the price and I could see the prices relative to others, including private label. I could see reviews. And then to some degree, after I get through those things, I might say, well, let me look at the image and is this actually the thing I want to buy? And then you have keywords, right? So because keywords will influence search. So if you think about those things, availability, price, reviews, image, and keyword, of all the things I can influence at scale across my portfolio, I have to make sure I'm doing those things really, really well. And maybe for new innovations or new propositions, I got to work a little bit more on the PDP and the great depth. But I think every day I wake up across my portfolio, I got to do those 5 fundamentals really, really well. That brings focus and brings discipline. AI will throw a wrinkle into that, AI search, right? Because it's a little less clear what we can influence or not. But even with AI, these things are still true. I have to be available. I have to be competitively priced, and I have to have strong reviews. Like those things don't change. What I would say is I think it casts a light a little bit more on where we need to focus our effort, limited time, limited resources. And if I'm a brand, what I'm trying to do in my mind is make sure that I have ways to really drive signal to action in all these areas, meaning that if these 5 things are important, my sales teams have to get really good and really fast at actioning these signals about availability. I know that's so important that I have to make sure that there is never a signal missed, that my sales teams of supply chain teams can't action real quickly to take that action. If I'm a revenue management team, I got to make sure that I am paying very close attention to price signals. Example right now, we have a lot of clients in home improvement, durables categories. They're dealing with tariffs. In they're passing price changes to retailers, and at the same time, competitors are passing price changes. So this price in search, this is a competitive landscape that is highly sensitive. And what that means is I got to make sure that my signal to action is very, very short, that I have alignment within my organization to know that if things change in that search result variable and my price is suddenly less competitive, or my availability is out of stock, I have to be supremely focused that that is being actioned on. Whereas PDP traditionally is considered the domain of the marketer, right? It's the canvas where you do all these kinds of creative things. But more and more, what's going to allow us to win is going to be, well, that search experience is dictated by these almost operational functions. And we got to make sure that we're operationally much tighter and stronger, because we might not even get the chance to wow them with beautiful creative.
Preach. I mean, we've always talked about it as the iceberg, and it's what's under the waterline you're not seeing. If it's not strong, forget it. And that's the operational hygiene is fundamental to it all. Couldn't agree more with that point.
A lot of these activities too that the report highlights, I feel like it even accentuate those fundamentals further, where it's I'm checking to see if something's in stock online before I buy it, or I'm going to scan the reviews. And just anecdotally, like every time at a Home Depot, I'm mostly like, I pull up my phone and I'm like, is this the thing that I wanted? What are the reviews around it, right? And I'm checking that for 3 seconds. I'm not in the aisle shopping for minutes on end, browsing through the enhanced content and that sort of thing. So as you said, as this becomes more digitally influenced in person, I feel like those fundamentals become even more magnified.
Yeah, the first moment of truth with images, I think there's a lot we can do with images to optimize them, but I think the first moment of truth is confusion, right? Especially with pack sizes, right? I think we've all seen versions of packages and we don't have the benefit of holding that in our hand and saying, this is what I'm buying. And we need to make sure at least that first mission of that image is to be easily understood. And the cost of that is actually higher, because if I fail the consumer there, not only do I have a bad experience, but we're increasing returns. Returns have operational costs. Yeah, absolutely. I think this data to me is really about filtering first order principles.
Yeah. As we kind of move into the last section of the report, which is how do I best make this data more actionable within my organization? One of the things that stood out to me, I mean, you had a great breakout, not only of the age demographic, but the category level demographic. And we see that some categories insanely digitally influenced, consumer electronics up to 79% of purchases that are digital, which makes sense, right? There's someone shopping for electronics, lots of specs, lots of features that they'd have to validate, probably higher consideration purchase in most cases. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you get to a market like Germany, trails in digital influence generally, and you get to something like food and beverage, alcohol, you get as low as 30%. So I think, across the board, we're seeing this digital influence grow, but there's still a variance to that growth. And I'm wondering if I'm brand manager, category manager within a brand, and I'm trying to actually understand how do I benchmark, like, how do you recommend going about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's right. I mean, we have to aggregate very high levels of these categories, but even within like CPG and food, if you looked at any subcategory, protein powders, something like that, it's going to change. So yes, generally, we do recommend that brands really think about doing analyses like this for their brand specifically and their categories. And I think the audience, there's the internal audience, but I think the real value comes from retailers and really being able to take this data to retailers and lead their thinking in terms of the category and what they need to do to invest in that. And for example, I mean, we all know the Amazon, the Walmarts of the world, they get all this, right? If they didn't believe in digitally influenced shoppers, we wouldn't be seeing the investment in retail.
Right. Yeah.
We wouldn't see them monetizing their data. We wouldn't see them investing in all of these tools to influence reviews and content and all these levers. We wouldn't see that. And I think that's one of the overlooked, I think the powers of the Walmarts and the Amazons is this trifecta of retail media controls, self-service controls retail media, influence traffic, access to content to change it quickly, very, very important. And then what I call data democratization. So once you get past the Amazons, the Walmarts, some degrees of Targets, et cetera, it's a big steep curve. There are a lot of retailers out there that still need to be educated and convinced that to embrace this journey. And they actually don't understand how the journey works in their site. So that research on search I talked about, they may not even understand how people come into their site. They might not know if it's mostly search or is it taxonomy. Where I think the value of this is doing this kind of research to get at the path to purchase and take that data into joint business plans for the purpose of really, I think, elevating your importance to that retailer to be seen as what we call a digital category captain, someone that you can trust as an advisor in your category. And also, I think, to plant the seed for pilots and to pilot new ways of doing things. So if I'm an immature retailer, if I have an immature retailer, I might set a goal to say, okay, success for us with this retailer is we want them to give us access to content APIs. We want them to allow us to change content faster. We want them to give us access to data like traffic and conversion so that we can do analysis for them and show them what all this investment is doing in dollars and sales. And then we also want to plant the seed around how we can help them win with things like their UX, like impulse disruption. We have a lot of brands that really get this, kind of think of this world from a category management view. And what they're doing, especially in like impulse categories, is they're doing studies like this and walking into retailers and saying, here are all the places where we could work together to help your UX site experience to drive more impulse shopping for these categories. Let's run a pilot with you. Give us the access to the data. We'll do the analysis for you, but let us pilot this. That's an amazing competitive advantage because you think about the Amazons and the Walmarts. In many ways, I think there's like a metaphor out there was based on the book, this idea of red ocean and blue ocean, right? Red ocean is sort of where the sharks are all swimming. And that's kind of where Amazon and Walmart is. Like the sharks are swimming there, but the blue ocean, that's the white space. And if you could be a first mover in those retail environments, you're going to have disproportional results, just like many brands who were the first movers on Amazon 10 years ago have seen long-term disproportional results. To say back to you, yes, I do think it's really valuable for brands to do this, but I think it's not just for the internal, hey, let's convince everyone in our company that e-com matters. I think about it as ammunition for externalizing education to that second and third tier retailer to become a more essential partner and reap the rewards of what that influence could get you from a brand perspective and a growth perspective.
As we wrap things up today, do you have anything you could share with us about future research that we could expect from Profitero?
Yeah, so I'd say like two things I'm really excited about in many ways is a continuation of our ROI series. So I think our ROI series dovetails really nicely with this because what we try to do is show, hey, this is where the consumer is going. And by the way, here's the ROI if you actually do those things. So one of the areas we're really focused on is the impact of digital shelf drivers on larger media ROI. We're actually doing some research now on the impact of content health, content optimization, on what that does from a return on investment improvement on retail media KPIs so that we could better tie together these two things and that an investment in content isn't just for the sake of for driving traffic and conversion in isolation, but it actually helps the net of the retail media dollars. And then the second thing we're really digging into is trying to, I say, validate some of the assumptions around what influences AI search, like Rufus. There's so many, I think, best practices, or I'll say not best practice, theories.
Practices
ideas
that could be best.
Ideas, theories. I love to do this all the time. If you just go to ChatGPT and you ask it, like, how would I optimize for Rufus? You get a lot of ideas. But we actually want to take some of our data and validate that and see what's in my control within my content. If I change that, can I change my share of Rufus search? Can I change my drivers? So I think we're going to have some research around validating some of those assumptions and trying to add to the conversation with some fact-based support.
Fact-based. I like that.
That was for sure another episode we'll make.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that's needed in the realm when you talk about what actually has impact on Rufus. We will definitely have you back to discuss those if you're open to it. I'd be looking forward to those reports. And thank you for your time today. It was great talking with you.
Awesome. Thanks. It's good to see you guys again.